by misuse of your liberty, you fall into sin. Even though you have freedom, you need to learn to temper that freedom and confine that freedom in order that you might really stay close to where God wants you to be and not get out on the fringes. All these things happened to Israel for an example to us, he says. Learn the lesson. Listen, they are written, back to verse 11, they are written for our admonition. Now, we've talked about the word admonish, nutheteo, admonition. It simply means to counsel somebody to change their behavior in light of judgment. If you keep going the way you're going to get in trouble. You better change. So he says to the Corinthians, all that I've been telling you about Israel is to help you to change. They're written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages are come. That simply means the last dispensation. What happened to Israel is a model to those of us who live in this last day before Christ comes. Learn your lesson, people. You can be blessed of God. You can be a part of a witnessing community. And yet you can forfeit your usefulness to God, not your salvation. That's not the point here. You can forfeit your usefulness of God, the prize of winning people to Christ. You can forfeit that by falling into sin because you've run your liberty too far. And then he principalizes the whole 11 verses. He takes that whole 11 verses and draws it into one principle, verse 12. Wherefore, let him that thinks he stands take heed, what? Lest he fall. That's the principle. That's a timeless principle. It's in Proverbs, isn't it? Pride comes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. That's not anything new. And he's simply saying, when you think you can handle it, and like the Corinthians were so smug and so independent, they could pack up their liberty and take it anywhere and they wouldn't have to worry. He says, you're in trouble. You better realize that just when you think you stand is just when you're ready to fall. Because you let your guard down. Be on guard. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. That's the point. You can be in the service of the Lord, just like Israel, called to be a witnessing community, like the Corinthian church, called to be a witnessing community. But if we think we're secure, that's just when we're the most vulnerable because we stop leaning on the Lord. Well, I know so much. I got so many Bible verses, and I know what I'm doing, and I got my theology straightened out, and I got control of things. That's just when you're vulnerable. When you stop leaning on him, you stand in your own resources. My father always says you have to maintain that invisible means of support. You have to stay tied to the source of power. Now, let's look at verse 13 and see how it ties in. Now, after all that warning, Paul closes with a very important, it's almost like a PS or a footnote. It's somewhat disconnected and yet connected. The Corinthians are going to say, boy, Paul, you're telling us to cool it with our liberty. You're telling us to kind of wind things down and not get out on the fringes and kind of circumscribe our lives a little more and stay a little closer to the middle and all of that. But listen, Paul, I mean, how are we going to prevent being in temptation? You can't help it. No matter where you go or what you do, you're going to get into the thing. I mean, what's going to happen when we get out there and we're trying to do what we ought to do and we get tempted? What's going to happen? So he gives them a word of comfort here. Hey, he says, there's no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. God is faithful, who will not permit you to be tempted above that you are able, but will with the temptation also make the way to escape that you may be able to bear it. You know why he says this? Not only to comfort them, but number two, to let them know that if they do fall into sin, they can't blame their circumstances, right? There's 2 points in this verse. Number one, Corinthians, I know it isn't easy. Be comforted in the fact that you'll never get into something that you can't get out of. But secondly, be aware of this, that if you get into something and you don't get out of it, whose fault is it? It's your fault. Because God will always make the way out. So keep it in mind. Use your liberty. You're going to get into temptation, but God will provide a way out. But if you don't take that way, that's your fault. Now let's look at verse 13 and take it apart and look at it in individual pieces. Now, there hath no temptation taken you. Stop right there. No temptation taken you. There's our key word again. How are we to understand its meaning? Well, let's just understand it in the broadest sense. There is no testing taken you. Okay? Let's not give it an evil meaning right now, all right? Let's just take it as in its neutral sense. There is no testing taken you. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. It could be either here. Let me show you what I mean. I'll try to give you a distinction that'll help. To understand the word temptation, as I said in the very beginning, you have to distinguish between a trial and a temptation in the sense of a good and an evil, okay? Now listen. External circumstances that you fall into provide a test. God will bring external circumstances into your life as tests, right? Now think with me on this. I want you to stay with me. External circumstances that we fall into provide a test. James 1:2. Count it all joy when you, peripipto, fall into many tests. They're external. They're not inside. We sort of fall into them. They're there. For example, a financial shortage. That's a test, right? Too much month at the end of the money. Or maybe you got a $3,000 balloon payment on your house, and your balloon is busted, and you don't know where your resources are. You got a financial problem, or you've had a medical bill that's decimated all of your surplus, and you're down to really living from hand to mouth. And you've got that presents an external circumstance. That's not inside, that's outside. Or on the other hand, a setback in plans. You've had great plans laid out for a certain thing, and kablooey, the bottom fell out of your plans. That's an external, that's a test. And God allows those tests, doesn't he? Well, look at Job, right? He had a financial shortage, didn't he? Lost everything. His plans all went awry. He got sick, all kinds of things. There's another one. Disease or sickness. That's an external circumstance. Death. Job's family died. People have death in their families and their circle of friends, and that's a test. A problem that doesn't have any solution. You've thought it out every way you can. There's no answer. That's a test. That's an external. Or maybe you're in a deal, and you're in this particular deal, and you've gotten involved in it, and all of a sudden you find out that somebody in this thing at the heart of the deal is a crook. You're going to go through with it, a little shady thing? That's a test. Persecution. Maybe you're maligned, maliciously, gossiped against, murmured about, persecuted for your faith. That's an external test. Or maybe you find yourself in a place where people are always sinning, and you're always in a test. I always think of Joseph in the house of Potiphar. You know, Joseph was under a test all the time he was there. It wasn't just when he got in the bedroom with Potiphar's wife and took off. That guy was in a test the whole time he was there, living in a pagan house. Now, maybe you're in a situation like this. These are tests. Now, listen to me. When you take that external test and you internalize it, then it becomes a temptation. When you internalize it and it kindles your lust and begins to entice you to do evil. For example, you say, I'm in a financial shortage. First thought is, Lord, this is great. What an exciting time for you to reveal yourself. Terrific. However, I could take a few more deductions on my income tax and help